Hi, everyone. I'm Erika Steinberg, and welcome to Around the Ladder, the podcast where we explore the unexpected paths of our career journeys. Many of us are familiar with the phrase climbing that corporate ladder, but what about when your path takes a different route and doesn't follow a straight line? I love the idea of going around the ladder, really carving out a different kind of career path for yourself. My own journey certainly took this route. After 25 years as an employee, I struck out on my own, and I'd say really like 3 years into that process, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm an entrepreneur. I didn't realize it. And so I created the Around the Ladder podcast so I could speak to others about their journeys. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Madeline Schwarz. Before becoming a communication coach, Madeline spent years on the sidelines being interrupted and talked over by the loudest voices in the room. Conquering her fears of public speaking was one of the most transformative experiences of her adult life. And it's the reason that she's so passionate about teaching creatives and introverts to use their voice. Prior to starting a business, Madeline designed and built window displays and brand experiences. She learned how to communicate a brand through the windows, how to get a message across in just seconds, and how to invite customers into the store. Now she helps other people communicate their own stories and change conversations in meetings, in boardrooms, and on stage. She's worked with leaders and teams at Mastercard, Airbnb, the Mellon Foundation, Etsy, and JPMorgan, and her clients have called her a career therapist, a lifesaver, and their secret weapon. And full disclosure, I am one of those clients. I worked with Madeline early on, and I credit my work with her with really getting me over some major obstacles that I had about speaking. And I think it's working. I think it helped, Madeline. What do you think?
Yeah, it's so exciting to be here and see you running your own podcast now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me today. Let's dive right in because I have so many questions for you, of course. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but you have made some major changes in your career. Would you please, I gave a quick synopsis of your journey. Would you please share a little bit about your career path and really how did you know that it was time to make the changes that you make?
Yeah, I have made a few big changes throughout my career, and I'm going to start with the last one because it had the most dramatic indicator or signs from the universe that it was time to make a change. Because within the course of a week, I sprained my ankle on a job site, and then I got laid off.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and I had actually been looking to make a change and, narrowing down a very disparate list of possibilities with a career coach to just a few. And that happened. And I just thought, I don't want another project manager job. This is not the best use of my skills. I had always wanted to start a business. And that's when I decided to go for it. And so after a summer of being laid up, not being able to walk on my ankle, I got certified as a coach and I started my business. So that was one of the larger career changes. But earlier on, when I started in book publishing, I had a great job with a lot of autonomy running the publicity department. But when I outgrew that position, I didn't want another job at a bigger, publishing house. And I also injured myself. So I had really bad carpal tunnel and felt like I needed to do something that didn't involve sitting in front of a computer all day long. And I really missed hands-on creative work. And that's how I ended up going back to school and getting another degree and getting recruited out of school for a window display job. And so, I did that for 10 years. And after being totally burnt out on the lifestyle and hours, as so much of that work happens overnight, I made a change.
Oh my goodness. So you're the first person who I've ever met who has designed window displays. So first of all, I think that's so cool. It reminds me of the movie Mannequin, which I'm totally dating myself on now. I don't know.
I know that movie too.
Of course you do. But looking back on book publishing, on designing window displays, writing press releases, how or really what skills or lessons did you learn from that still show up or do show up in your coaching work that you do today?
Yeah, I think of it as all storytelling. So I've been telling stories my entire career, just in a lot of different mediums. So I told them in print when I was a book publicist, because I was writing press releases and placing authors and books in national media like the New York Times. And then when I moved into window displays and experiential marketing, I was telling stories in 3D. And and what I do now is help people tell their own story and tell stories about their work. And the things that really translate from that are you have to, in both situations, you have to get people's attention really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's something that I had to learn as a window display designer, because it really determined whether or not customers came into the store. This is back when every brand had brick and mortar stores. And so I've applied that to what I do now, like really focusing on helping people be clear, be concise, and tell compelling stories that are going to capture their audience's attention and be relatable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I remember when you and I worked, so much came up for me when you and I worked together. It was, like I didn't know how to tell a story. I was very nervous about it. I remember being so nervous, like even when it was just the two of us over Zoom, I found myself, tripping over my words and things like that. When you start your coaching work, it occurs to me like for what was going on for me was probably a healthy dose of imposter syndrome, which I know a lot of people deal with and work through. But when you're coaching somebody and they do feel overshadowed or they feel like they don't belong in the room, how do you start? Like, I know how you started with me. I don't want to assume that that's how you start with everybody, but maybe it is maybe we are coming from a more similar starting point than we all realize.
Yeah, mindset is a really big component of the work that I do with clients. And what you shared of feeling nervous to even practice in front of me is a very common experience of clients, that they get really embarrassed and flustered. And I always tell people, like, that's the same thing that's going to happen when you're on stage or when you're giving a presentation in front of senior leaders or an important client prospect and you're feeling really nervous. So you want to stumble through it here, get past that awkwardness. If you're going to have the awkward experience, do you want it to be in front of the clients? Or do you want to do it now? And so, actually practicing together is part of what I do. So helping people, it's three components: helping people get clear on their message, mm-hmm. really elevating the delivery so that that's compelling. That's where storytelling comes in and other ways of creating audience engagement, and teaching people new ways to practice that they're actually willing to do. And then the third part is mindset. And by that, I mean your thinking and your beliefs about yourself as a communicator and leader. Because for a lot of people, the soundtrack running in their head is filled with those imposter thoughts of not being qualified enough, not being good enough, not being interested enough, fill in the blank. And those are the things that can undermine your confidence, even when you have a really well-crafted presentation and you can even be well rehearsed. But if those are the loudest thoughts, like when you are actually delivering that presentation, they can trip you up.
Yeah, they can really get in your way, and they can be really loud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I help people turn that down.
Yes, remember that. So public speaking is, I remember where was it? I heard this years ago that some people would list like their greatest fears, and they would, and in order of the greatest fear, and like they would list death, and then they would list public speaking as even worse than death.
It's something like 70% of the population fears public speaking.
I know. So, but what do you think is the biggest myth that people believe about public speaking?
So one of the biggest myths is that people think that they need to be an extrovert to be a good public speaker. I was actually just chatting with someone yesterday who I went to college with, and he mentioned that he knew a lot of introverts who didn't make great extroverts when they're giving presentations. And my thought was, no kidding. Like it never feels good for an introvert to feel like they have to put on extrovert clothes in order to speak in public or present their ideas in front of a group. And it really adds to the nervousness and the pressure it creates because it feels inauthentic and performative. And so I do think that is one of the biggest myths that people really misunderstand or mischaracterize, that this is an arena only for the extrovert.
Yeah. But of course, extroverts, people who are extroverted are not the only people who are in a position who have to speak. So how do you help somebody who is an introvert, because you do work with, and I consider myself an extroverted introvert. I get my energy by going internally. I can be extroverted when I'm tired. Don't ask me to be engaging or fun or anything like that. I need rest and I need some quiet time alone. But so many, when you're working with somebody who is an introvert, how do you help them rewrite that story that this is the domain of extroverts? How do you help them over those initial obstacles?
Yeah, well, it does go back to the mindset piece that I was talking about and really rethinking how they consider that as an asset or a detriment, because especially in the corporate environment, I think we've often been fed a lot of stories and evidence that it's a disadvantage to be an introvert and that it would be better. You will be more skilled as a salesperson, as a networker, as a leader, if you are more extroverted or, louder, more visible, etc. And that's an experience that I see, like it was my own experience being given some pretty painful feedback early in my career that I was too quiet. And it's something I see mirrored in many, many clients. And so being able to, one, process that feedback and let go of it, and then finding and leaning into your own strengths that you have as a communicator because you're introverted. And for example, being a great listener, that's an amazing skill when you think about connecting with your audience when you are speaking, or being highly observant, right? Again, that's a way to really be able to adapt how to present your ideas because you're in tune with your audience.
Yeah, I think I had an experience like that recently. I was at a client and making a couple of presentations during their partner retreat. And I wasn't feeling entirely connected to the group in there. And then I noticed that all of the left-handed people were sitting in a row. I said, did you guys put the lefties all in a row together? And one of them, who was sitting in the first seat right in front of me, one of the partners looked up at me and said, "You're very observant." And we had a moment, and then I asked him a question, and it changed everything about the presentation for me. It changed how I felt. It changed I felt the shift in the room. So I think that's like that, those quiet leaders, it's turning your actual nature to your advantage. Right. Is really what you're helping people do.
Yeah, because the problem isn't being introverted. It's if you think that being introverted puts you at a disadvantage.
Got it. That's a little bit of a brain twister, but I understand. I understand. Now, something else that comes up. Now, I work with lawyers and law firms, and so interruptions come up. Surprise, lawyers sometimes interrupt. How do you coach people, especially introverted people, but really anybody who deal with interruptions? How do you reclaim your authority? How do you, if you feel like maybe you're losing control of the room, how do you regain that?
Yeah. So first, I want to just mention two things that are not going to solve this problem for you. And actually really three. One is time. So many people are avoiding it, thinking that there will be a better time to address the problem, and that is not going to cut it. And the other is just sitting back and being quiet. Like, again, as you sit in your seething resentment, like that is not going to solve this either, and being conflict averse. So what I always tell clients is, like, it is going to require feeling uncomfortable to address this, but that's something you're already feeling now, right? Like the pain and discomfort of being interrupted, overlooked, going unheard at work, like that feels massively uncomfortable. So it's just choosing a different, like, temporary discomfort to reclaim your own agency and work toward solving this problem. And so some of the strategies that are helpful is finding your allies, right? Who are the people who are going to help amplify your ideas or stick up for you when you do, address this with whoever is doing the interrupting. The second is allowing other people to be upset, right? Like, people often avoid addressing it because they're afraid of stepping on toes or people being mad. And when you just allow, like, other people to have their emotions, then you can put your energy toward more productive things, like actually how you want to get your ideas across. Mm-hmm. And then practicing the skill of polite interrupts. And to give you an example, when someone interrupts, you might answer with, "Oh, like, that's a great point," or "Thanks for bringing that up," to go back to what I was saying. And then you continue along, right? And so in the moment, depending on the dynamic, you might not want to call them out, in a really, like, public way, because that can just create a very defensive dynamic. And so I think sometimes it's better to just run with it, redirect back to what you were saying, and then address it one-on-one.
Yeah. And it's so simple. Say, "Oh, that's a really good point," because you're keeping it positive.
Right.
And then redirect back to exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. And then one of the other things that I work with on people is, if they're in a position of leadership and can influence this dynamic of interruptions, is really helping think through how they can develop some community guidelines for meetings to improve the dynamic for everyone. Because so often the onus is put on the introvert, or, the quieter person. And really, like, it should be a challenge for the company and the team to solve, because it is absolutely affecting the bottom line when you are only hearing from a small percentage of people on your team.
Yes. I think back to statistics that I used to hear when my kids were younger about girls in school with boys there and without boys there, and and just how that affected whether or not people spoke up and whether or not they let their voices be heard in class. And it's it's this, if it's the same thing in elementary school, I'm sure that continues also into for those people into the working world.
Yeah. And one of the techniques that I use in those group environments is something called 1, 2, 3, and me. So after you speak, you need to wait for 3 more people to speak before you chime in again.
Yeah. It's just, some meeting etiquette.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Right. And that's something that you can introduce as a rule or a guideline for meetings. And it gives everyone a sense of accountability.
Yeah. I want to go back to something when you were describing the different kind of discomfort. It reminded me of something that I discovered a while ago, that you could be sitting in something that is familiar, that doesn't feel good, but it's familiar. So you could not be feeling good, and it's easier to sit in that than it is to sit in something that is unfamiliar, even though it might feel better. And when you were talking about the different kind of discomfort, it reminded me of that. So it reminded me of that. It reminded me of like something that I read that you've said, maybe I read it on your website or on your LinkedIn. I can't remember, was that communication is a skill like baseball or knitting, that you have that first stitch. So that first bit of like, oh, this is unfamiliar. So it feels bad, even though it might not feel bad. Like what is that first stitch of knitting, or the first swing, or the first pitch, or something? Pick whatever image you want to pick. What is the first thing that somebody should practice if they're terrified of public speaking and we want it to get it to something that feels familiar and good?
Yeah. Start small. So I think of public speaking as any time that you are speaking out loud to other people. And when you define it like that, as opposed to presentations with a capital P, there are infinitely more opportunities to practice and develop your skills. And if giving a presentation, if you're terrified to speak at work, or when you're representing your company, find some other places to practice those skills first. For instance, volunteering. Like I had one client, we were working together, and in this case, she had a classified job for the government. So we couldn't work on anything related to her, daily work presentation. But she did have a leadership role in a nonprofit that she volunteered for. And so we applied all of the same skills to developing a presentation for that capacity. And then she was able to take those back to her day job. And so that's one way to do it. Another way is to go to a city council meeting, right? Like go to a meeting, talk about something that you care about in your neighborhood. And sometimes it can feel a lot less scary to take that first swing.
That sounds scary.
Yeah, when you're in an anonymous environment instead of in front of the watchful eyes of coworkers. So those are a couple of ways that I recommend for people. And then like in a work setting, also, you can start small there. Like just commit to raising your hand and making a comment in a meeting. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the most profound one, but making your voice heard and working through that fear and discomfort and doing it anyway is a place to start. And one of the things that I teach my clients is how to experiment and evaluate, right? So you're going to try out one of those things, and just like any experiment, you have more data at the end. And when you evaluate the data, then you can get smarter in how you approach that same thing next time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something small. I mean, even by that definition, speaking in front of other people, that could be a conversation, conversations with coworkers. That could be, it could be speaking with a client. It could be speaking with, at a networking event and just striking up a conversation with people who you know. So when you define it that widely, then yes, there's so many opportunities to practice and to get more comfortable with speaking in front of others.
Yeah. And you can do it with family members too.
Yeah.
All of the time. My clients tell me they take the tools that I've taught them for work situations and they apply them to be more persuasive with their family members.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think about my family when I was growing up. I could have used that then. I grew up in one of the families where, you had to shout to be heard. Everybody was like hands moving all over the place and lots of opinions. So I could have used it. When you think about your clients now, I'm always curious about those transformational stories and, somebody going from being silent in meetings to really leading and being in the front of the room and owning that space. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but when you think about some of the transformations that your clients have gone through, do any come to mind that you would share with us?
I worked with this one client. She was a managing director. And the first thing that we worked on, she reached out to me because she was going to be on a panel in front of 200 clients with 3 or 4 partners from the firm. And so we got on the phone. She said, I'm going to be on this panel in front of 200 clients in 2 weeks. Can you help me? And she was terrified of public speaking. And so we spent 2 really intense weeks preparing. So we worked on the messaging to really streamline the content that was provided by her company. We worked on how to deliver it so that her voice didn't shake. How to breathe through some of that fear, and also worked on some of the mindset things, the blocks that she had around being up on stage in front of all of those people, especially as a woman in a very male-dominated space, or being the most junior person that was going to be presenting. And so she got great feedback on that panel, but she was still pretty scared of public speaking. And so then we worked together again on another presentation. And this time she was leading a pitch for a new prospect. And she had always been more of a background person in the pitches. And this time they were presenting to a women's institution. She was the most senior woman on the team. And so she was the lead, even though there was a partner also participating in the pitch. And with that, one of the big transformations was really helping her step into the role of leader, right? And so not defaulting to the partner, knowing that they were not going to win this business if the male partner was still like the obvious lead in the presentation. And also bringing in some of her own stories to highlight her different approach. And that pitch, like for her team, won $250 million of business. And it completely transformed her career. And, when I talked to her maybe 6 months later or a year later, she said she had then done an all hands presentation at the, end of year company event, and that it was no longer a big deal to speak in public. Like, she was still nervous, but she knew exactly what to do to prepare, to calm her nerves. And she felt really confident getting on stage that time.
That's a huge transformation. And to me, that goes so much further than transforming from somebody who was afraid of speaking to somebody who wasn't afraid of speaking. Like, it just hit me really when you were telling that story, that it's when you do go through this kind of transformation or this kind of change or shift for yourself, it opens up so much more. It's not just like, oh, now I can get in front of a group and I can speak. It seems like it just opens up a lot more in your world.
It does, because it really changes how you see yourself as a leader. And so one of the other things that changed for her was feeling more confident delegating to her team and really embodying that role as a leader of other people at the company.
Yeah, that is that's huge. It's just huge. You mentioned working with her and of course working with others to clarify their story, own their story. Can you talk about, what's behind that, and like really what's the key to helping somebody clarify their story? Because that is a huge part of any presentation or whatever, or sharing information.
I think of it like puzzles, right? When you are doing a big jigsaw puzzle, you need to know what the image is that you are actually creating. Because if you don't have that map, everything is blurry. You can just have 1,000 pieces strewn out on the table and it's a mess. So what I start with on any type of presentation or storytelling is really honing in on what do you want people to remember. So at the end of the story, at the end of the business meeting, conference talk, you name it, like, what is it that you want your audience to walk away with? And then we reverse engineer from there. So it's really like putting those corners of the puzzle into place.
Yes. And then filling in the outside edge. And then you work inward from there.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're talking about that, because I have the image of a jigsaw puzzle in mind, and and yes, pieces are strewn all across the table. How do you help somebody take like all of these different thoughts in their head and turn it into something that's clear, that can be shared, and really is impactful?
Yeah, bringing process to something that's pretty chaotic and anxiety inducing for a lot of people. And so in my career, I was a designer, and then I was also a project manager. And so I really combine those two things, like have this playful, creative approach, but it also meets process. And the what I find with clients before I work with them is that the way they are normally doing their presentations is they get assigned, a client presentation, or they know that they're speaking at a conference in X number of weeks or months, and they sit down in front of their computer and they open up a slide deck and they start fiddling with their slides. And 5 hours later, 5 days, whatever time increment, you have a lot of half-baked ideas, but nothing complete, and you're more confused than when you started. And so I think people are doing it backwards. And the way that I approach it is that we first decide on the message, then we decide on your stories and examples, and create an outline from there, and then start building out, any accompanying visuals that you're going to use in a presentation. And so, I have a step-by-step process that I share with people to help calm that chaos.
I feel like you should put that on a t-shirt or a hat.
Maybe I will.
I know. For the people who have gone through who've gone through working with you. Yes, I calmed the chaos. It's not lost on me, of course, that you are a self-proclaimed introvert, and you've turned communication into your work now. So what has your work taught you about your own voice? And what do you know now that you wish that you had known years ago when you were being talked over in those rooms?
You don't have to get it perfect. That's a big one, and something that I really struggled with. You don't have to be the loudest in the room, and you don't even have to be the first to jump in. But you do have to use your voice, because the work doesn't speak for itself. And that is such I think another myth that creatives have. They think if the work is good enough that people will see the value in it. And you have to speak for it. You have to be able to explain it, the strategy around how you got there. And so learning how to do that and really reframing silence as strategic and quiet as powerful. And so what I found is, I did have plenty of instances where people thought, oh, she's so quiet, or why doesn't she ever speak? But when you are quietly observing, and you are not talking all of the time just to hear the sound of your own voice, when you do actually chime in, people pay more attention, because they know that if you are opening your mouth, you have something important to say. And that's one of the things that really shifted for me is, not letting someone else define quiet as a problem, and instead seeing it as this superpower.
Yeah. I remember when my daughter, who's now in 10th grade, was in kindergarten. And my daughter she can talk like no one else can talk. She's fantastic. Her best friend was super, super quiet, and Eden could draw her out. But one of the things that I realized with this friend of hers was that she would be very quiet. If you asked her a question, it seemed like she wasn't answering. She'd be very quiet. And then she would speak this perfect, well thought out, complete set of thoughts or answers or responses far beyond her years. And she just needed that time to compose it in her head, and then she could deliver it in her voice. And it was so powerful. And she was 5. So I often wondered how, they're not, we moved away, they're not friends anymore, but I often wondered, I wonder what kind of young woman she's developed into now. I think that she's probably something to behold.
Yeah, I can absolutely believe that, because while extroverts are talking, introverts are quietly solving problems in their head.
Yep.
But teams and organizations are never going to hear them unless they purposely create space for that.
Yes, yes. And you need both. You need both.
Yeah.
Ideally. So we've gone through so much time. I have one last question for you. I have two favorite questions, and you kind of answered the one about something that you would share with your younger self or yourself from before. So I'm going to turn to a different one. You've created this business for yourself. So what unexpected lessons or rewards have come to you from really going around your own ladder rather than climbing a more traditional one?
The biggest thing is that when I was in a quote unquote creative job, I never left my desk. We were under so much pressure to generate new window concepts. We hardly ever got out of the office, and my life was really lacking inspiration for the creative work that I needed to do. And now I meet inspiring people all of the time. I learn so much from helping people prepare their talks on, all kinds of topics. And I find that doing this work as a coach and a communication consultant, that I get to use all of my creativity toward this other goal, right? And have a bigger impact in helping other people make communication easy and streamlined. And so that really has been one of the biggest surprises, that I wasn't leaving my creative job. I was getting to do something more creative now.
Yeah. Yeah. It depends on how we define creative, really.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you did, because then I had the opportunity to work with you, which really helped me. And I'm absolutely grateful for that. And I'm sure at some point I'm going to want to level up again, and we'll be working together again. So
amazing. I look forward to that.
Yes, yes, same thing. So thank you again so much for joining me today. And if you're tuning in, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And please do share Around the Ladder with others who you think may be interested. And I hope to see everyone again soon. Bye.